Welcome and thank you for standing by. Currently, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Today's webinar is being recorded and the recording will be posted publicly. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now I'd like to turn the call over to your host for today, Deb Rivera.
Great, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for our data.census.gov Q&A webinar. So as stated, my name is Deb Rivera, and I will be your host for today's webinar event, where we will focus on addressing the most common questions that we have received over the recent months regarding data.census.gov, the U.S. Census Bureau's primary data platform, as well as the Microdata Access Tool and the Census API. Before we get started, I want to thank my Census Bureau colleagues for joining me today and helping to support our speaker. Now, I will turn things over to our presenter in just a moment, but first I have a few housekeeping items to share. I would like to encourage you all to make use of the Q&A panel in WebEx to submit questions throughout the webinar. The question and answer panel is located along the right side of your WebEx screen. If you cannot see it, you may need to click on the three dots at the bottom right to pull it up. Our panelists will help answer as many questions as they can that are related to today's topic. So if you have a question related to data.census.gov, the Microdata Access Tool, or the Census API, please submit it through the Q&A panel. Please keep in mind, though, that we will not be able to address questions on other topics like surveys, the collection process, methodology, or other census products. Now, as a final note, we are recording the webinar today, and the recording will be available through the Census Academy website. So with that, welcome again. Thank you so much for joining us, and it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Please welcome Tyson Weister.
Thank you so much, Deb, and thank you all for joining the webinar this afternoon and spend some time with us on data.census.gov questions and answers. My name is Tyson Weister. I work on the communications team in the Center for Enterprise Dissemination. We are the area responsible for data.census.gov, the Microdata Access Tool on data.census.gov, as well as the Census Data Application Programming Interface, or API. So what I have planned today is to address questions that we've received recently and common questions that we receive across all three of these ways of accessing data. And generally speaking, we're going to start with more basic questions, topics, and tools first, and progressively advance to more detailed types of questions as we move throughout the presentation today. So with that, for data.census.gov, I've organized the questions into three different types. The first section are going to be question and answers around finding data. Then we're going to move on to question and answers regarding selecting geographies, and then questions about downloading and printing. So to get started on a very basic level, we get questions from folks wanting to know what data are available on our site, and even questions about what data.census.gov is. So we are the primary platform to get data from the U.S. Census Bureau. What that means is we have data from the most popular surveys and programs. And on a high level, what you can see here on the slide, that will include American Community Survey data going back to 2010, decennial census data back to the Census 2000, and economic census and selected economic surveys going back to 2012. If you'd like to access a detailed listing of all the different types of data sets and availability by year, we have a chart ready for you to access using the link on the left-hand side. And ultimately, being that we're the primary platform, we are working to onboard more surveys and programs that the Census Bureau has and get the data into data.census.gov. So that is a longer term goal, to get some of those other surveys and programs into the site. And moving on to some other ways, we don't have everything that the Census Bureau collects. We've listed here some popular resources for you to access data that we get questions about regularly from the Census Bureau. So we've listed essentially different web pages from the program areas on census.gov, websites to the file transfer protocol or FTP, and the application programming interface or API. So those are ways that you'll typically find information through other surveys and programs or historical data. So data from before the 2000 census, before the 2010 American Community Survey, and data before the 2012 economic census, as well as other popular surveys and programs that aren't currently on data.census.gov, such as the Population Estimates Program or Equal Opportunity Employment Tabulation. So that sets the stage for what data are available, and there are multiple different types of websites and tools that the Census Bureau has. Being the primary platform, by and large, what that means is we have a comprehensive set of tables on our site for the programs that are in data.census.gov. And we provide that data for a comprehensive set of geographies. So if you were to access data from some of the other tools across the Census Bureau, data.census.gov typically has more information and for more geographies in comparison to some of those other tools. So when you're searching on the site, lots of times you'll want data for more than one estimate at a time, and we get users asking, how do I find data for multiple topics? Typically, you'll want to select topic filters and run them as separate searches. So this is a screenshot showing an example. If I was interested in finding the percent veterans and the median household income in the United States, those would typically be two separate searches. So I would select a topic filter for veterans that would lead me to the tables on our site that match veterans. And ultimately, it would lead me to this table that shows 7.1% of the population being a veteran. When I select the topic tag for income and earnings, that would take me to all of the tables that are tagged with the income and earnings topic, including this screenshot that shows median household income in the US being $64,994. So do keep in mind, you typically want to run them as separate searches for each topic unless you want the data cross-tabulated. So when you specify more than one topic at a time, the system's going to look for every table that has all of the topics you specified, in this case, veterans, and the topic income and earnings, if I completed that in a single search. And that typically is going to lead you to tables where the data have been cross-tabulated. So that is an example of a search that took me to a table showing the median income of veterans being $43,541. Another question that we get, especially when users are referencing data from the decennial census, why does the same table ID provide different layouts? So do keep in mind, if you're looking at data from the decennial census program, they use the same table ID, and depending on the data set, the table layout could be different. So this is just a side-by-side screenshot showing an example where on the left, I'm viewing table P1 from the data set 2020, decennial census redistricting data, public law 94-171, and that table provides data for race. But when you're clicked into, on the right-hand side, again, table P1, but the product being the 2020 decennial census demographic and housing characteristics file, in that data set, table P1 only provides total population. So it's just a good reminder to always reference the product that you're clicked into. You'll always see it in the product drop-down menu at the top of the table, and confirm that it matches what you are intending to access data for. Lots of folks come to the Census Bureau to get data on race or Hispanic origin. We collect very detailed information, and the data are tabulated in a variety of ways. So when you're wanting to access data by race and ethnicity, what I wanted to showcase here is that there are two different sets of filters that take you to two different types of tables. On the left-hand side, when you select the filter that has very basic language, it just says Asian, and you can see that it adds to the URL T equals Asian. That is capturing the fact that I selected a topic filter titled Asian. Those filters that have basic language and add words to the URL take you to standard tables on race and ethnicity, and that will typically give you the most recent data for the widest selection of geographic areas. There are a whole nother set of race and ethnicity filters that add codes to the URL. This is an example showing where I selected Asian alone and it added T equals 012 to the URL. You'll typically see these filters that add codes tend to have the phrase alone or in combination in the URL or in the filter as well. And all of these will take you to iterated tables. So just be mindful that these filters take you to two completely different sets of tables. If you're not sure where to start, we recommend using an example that follows more closely with what I show on the left-hand side, or to check independently through two different searches the tables that you get using both methods. And this is discussed further in much more detail in a recorded webinar on navigating data.census.gov to access race and ethnicity data using the link on the slide. Moving on, we get lots of users too that have wrote us in asking how to access data for detailed language spoken at home. You have two options to get this information if you want it by detailed language category. The first option is to use table B16001. This is a pre-made language table on data.census.gov that provides data for 42 detailed language categories. So you get things like English, Spanish, French, Haitian, Italian, Portuguese. And I'm not showing it here on the slide, but the table will also specify how many of those speakers also speak English very well, and how many of those speakers speak one of these languages other than English and speak English less than very well. The big thing to note with this particular table is that there were changes made in 2016. You can explore the details of that using the user note that I've linked to at the top of the slide. And with those changes, there were geographic restrictions applied to the table. So this means that if you're accessing the data through the ACS 5-year estimates, the lowest level of geography that you can get these data for are for an area called public use microdata areas, or PUMAs. We're going to talk about those in more detail later on in the presentation, but just know that it doesn't follow the standard set of geographies that most other ACS 5-year tables are available for. And then the second option for you to get detailed language data would be to create a custom table using the Microdata Access tool. We are going to cover common questions about microdata access later on in this presentation. And the benefit of using the custom table is that you can get a few more detailed language categories. So over 100 plus detailed languages instead of the 42 provided through the pre-made table. As of recently, we've also been getting questions on what information does the Census Bureau have on voting. On data.census.gov, you'll be able to access the data from two different sources. First is the American Community Survey, and what they provide are data on the citizen voting age population. The screenshot at the top shows this data from table DP05, and it also happens to break out the data for males versus females. There is one other ACS table on data.census.gov that provides a few more demographic characteristics of the voting age population, and it's exclusively available through ACS one-year estimates. If you'd like to get additional information on voting, moving on to item number 2, you can go to the Current Population Survey, or CPS, Voting and Registration Supplement. You can access this through data.census.gov/MDAT. And as you can see in the screenshot at the bottom, I'm here on the MDAT landing page, and I've selected the CPS Voting Supplement as the data set. And what this data source provides is information on voter registration and voter turnout at specific periods where this, around specific elections where this information was captured through the survey. And what we also wanted to note here is that, again, you get information on voting age population, voter registration, and voter turnout. The Census Bureau does not ask questions in any of our surveys of partisan nature, such as party affiliation or which candidate an individual voted for. So for more details, please visit the link to our voting webpage. And we also wanted to point out, how can I find relevant technical documentation? There's a notes button at the top of every table on data.census.gov. And when you click it, you'll get helpful information that you can read on screen. It also typically contains information for technical documentation. It's how you would go about finding the user note for the language table that I provided the link to elsewhere, and lots of other great information are housed within the technical documentation. And because we've received so many questions about when are the next data releases coming up on data.census.gov, our staff have put together a webpage on upcoming data releases. So this is where you'll be able to browse releases that are expected to be coming to our site. You'll be able to click through the different months that are upcoming and see some of those data releases, including major releases coming from the economic census, and looking into fall, where you'll see ACS 1-year and 5-year estimates scheduled to be released for the 2024 vintage. All right, moving away from questions on finding specific types of data to finding the data for specific geographic areas, we get lots of questions about how to select the correct geography on data.census.gov. One of those questions on a basic level, how do I select my city or town? At the Census Bureau, we classify what you would think of as your city or town in one of 2 different geography selections. So for most states across the country, what you would find as your city would be a place geography, and on the left-hand side of the filter panel, you'll see place. You'll be able to click through the prompts, and the screenshot on the left is showing an example of selecting the filter for Atlanta. For some states, primarily those in the Northeast and Midwest, what are those towns, townships, and boroughs in those areas are classified in our data as county subdivision. So on the left-hand side of the filter panel, you'll see just above place, there's a selection for county subdivision, and you'll be able to click through the prompts and ultimately make a selection. The good news, besides knowing that you may need to check both of these levels of geography, is that we offer reference mapping features on our site. So if you wanted to visually confirm to make sure that you've selected the geography you meant to, and you really have a good grasp on understanding the area that you're seeing data for, what you'll do is make a single geography selection and then immediately click on Maps using the tab at the top. And anytime you've selected just one geography, the system's going to be very good about zooming you into that area automatically and showing you that selection on a map. So this is an example on the left where I wasn't sure offhand when helping a user whether they wanted data for Bethel CDP, which is stands for census designated place in Vermont, or if they wanted data for Bethel town. So by making those selections independently through 2 different searches and clicking on the maps, I was able to share visually what the data represent for each of these 2 geographies. And if you're at all familiar with the local area, this would shed light on which geography selection you are intending to get data for. So do keep in mind we have that as a resource for you to click our Maps tab at the top and use it for reference purposes. Another question we often get from users is, how do I access data for zip codes? We have made this process easier over the past couple years. On the left-hand side, you'll notice that zip code tabulation area, also called ZICTA, that is listed here as one of the common geographies suggested that you may want to try from the start. And what you'll use ZICTAs for is anytime you want zip code level information for people or housing. This includes all zip code related data from the American Community Survey and the decennial census. And zip code tabulation areas, they are general representations of actual zip codes. When you're accessing data for business, you would want to use, in that case, the actual 5-digit zip code selection. You will find that selection when you click in the geography filter panel under all geographies. The very first option at the top is 5-digit zip code, and that will take you down the pathway to zip code selections that are compatible with the business patterns survey. So again, if you want data on people and housing, use ZICTA. If you want data on businesses, use 5-digit zip code, and you'll be able to see number of establishments, annual payroll, and number of employees. At the Census Bureau, we have over 240 different levels of geography to choose from. Not every geography is compatible with every table or every data set. So anytime that you want to know which geographies are compatible with a particular selection, you can make that selection first and then go select your geography next using the summary level tab. So this example is showing a screenshot where I've selected the data set I'm interested in, the ACS 5-year estimates detailed tables. And then on the left, I clicked all geographies and chose the summary level tab at the top. When you do this, it is showing just the summary levels. So those levels of geography that are compatible with this data set, and every other summary level is hidden from view. When you get to the table display itself, we get lots of questions from users saying that they, don't see their geography in a table. Another variation of this question could be, why am I not able to select by geography? And both of those issues are often a result of being clicked into a data set that doesn't cover the geography you're wanting it to cover. And in most cases, it's a situation where you're clicked into ACS 1-year estimates. Those are tables that are provided for geographies with 65,000 people or more. You would need to manually switch to ACS 5-year estimates to see the data for all of your geographic areas. We recently also added a note at the top of ACS 1-year tables that give you a little tip for this process. So we hope that helps. In this screenshot I'm showing shows the final selection where we are in fact clicked into ACS 5-year and truly seeing the data for all counties in Indiana, regardless of population size. Another possible cause for not seeing data for all of the geographies you selected is that you selected a vintage of a geography that's not compatible with the year of data you're clicked into. So to step this process back, do keep in mind that geographic areas can be redefined over time, especially between each decennial census. All of the statistical areas could be redefined, and this is showing you an example of that in action. So in Imperial County, there were changes in census tracts. In this particular instance, shows in 2010, there was a census tract called 121. And then in 2020, because population grew between the decennial censuses, we had to divide this census tract into two areas. So it now is census tract 121.01 and 121.02. On data.census.gov, you would be able to select in the geography filter panel any one of these three census tract geographies. And when you make a selection, if the selection you made is compatible with the data set you're clicked into, you'll see it as a column in the table. And if it's not compatible, you won't see it. So this is an example showing this on screen on the left. I've selected the geography for California and the geography census tract 121. Remember, that was the 2010 census vintage of the geography. And then when I look at the table on the right, I only see data for California. So what I would need to do to view the data would be to either click into the product drop-down menu and switch into a product that is compatible with this vintage of the geography. For instance, if I change to the 2019 ACS 5-year estimates, I would see data for both geographies. Or if I truly needed the 2023 ACS 5-year estimates, I would need to select the census tracts 121.01 and 121.02. For the decennial census, it's a lot, relatively intuitive to know which vintage of geography is compatible. For the ACS, they provide detailed listing for geographic vintage for each release of the ACS. So if you'd like to get more information, the web page is listed at the bottom. And the way you would work through this, at the top hand side of the screenshot, there's different tabs for the different years. You would click into the year of interest. So the 2023 would cover the information for the 2023 ACS 1-year estimates, as well as the 2023 ACS 5-year estimates. And then this web page would say that those data are tabulated based on a particular vintage of the geography. So if I were to scroll to the census tracts section, I would see that it's based on the 2020 vintage of census tracts. And we do have additional resources at the Census Bureau to compare geography changes over time. One of those is the Tiger Web Decennial product that allows you to visually explore these changes. We have relationship files and contact information to our geography specialists. And just two more additional geography questions and answers I wanted to share. We get lots of folks wanting to access information for collections of geography that they are not immediately able to see. For instance, we often get questions from users wanting to access data for all census tracts within their city. So what I'm pointing out here in the screenshot is, rather than going down the default pathway, there may be some instances where these more complex selections of geography are buried in something called within other geographies. So the way you would start this process, on the left-hand side, I've clicked into census tract. That's the geography I want to select. And then at the top of the screen, you expand out the within other geographies and choose place. That's going to take me down the pathway to get data for all census tracts fully or partially within a city. And in this example, I selected all census tracts fully or partially within Palo Alto City, California. And finally, based on user feedback we've received over the years, we also recently added the ability to search by address directly on data.census.gov. So The trickiest part is just knowing how to start the process. What you'll want to look for in the screenshot here is the geography pin icon. You'll see it in the single search bar throughout the site. And once you click that, it's going to give you a pop-up window where you can type in an address of interest. When the system finds a match for the address, you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen that you're taken to the address card. So this tells you that the address falls within specific blocks, census tracts, block groups, congressional districts, school districts, and this is a clickable list of geographies. So when you click one of these geographic areas, you would be able to start accessing the table data for these areas. Again, to get started on this process, look for the geography pin icon in the single search bar. And just to wrap up data.census.gov questions with some questions that we often get about downloading and printing. One question is, how can I get the correct download format and layout? We hope that we have made this process more intuitive in the past month when we have revised the process. So what we've done is group all of the different possible output formats, Excel, CSV, and zip. Those are now housed under a single download button. So what that allows us to do is when you click download, we can now show a pop-up window where we give a little bit of an explanation of what you get through these different formats instead of simply showing a button for Excel, CSV, and zip. And what you'll find through this is that the first two options, Excel and CSV, those are going to give you presentation-ready table formats. So it's going to look almost identical to what you're seeing displayed on data.census.gov. Now, if you're wanting to work with the data, maybe you want to sort it, create your own map using your own software, you would be looking for the zip file format most likely. And this allows us to provide that description that the zip file is a collection of flat machine-readable CSV files. And by the way, they do include the geo IDs in that option. So hopefully this will no longer be a common question, but excited to share with you those details. Once you went through the process to download the output, we also get users that want to know if the output has reflected the edits they've made on screen. So for instance, if you turn on or off margins of error, hide columns of the table, those type of edits do carry over if you're outputting the data into Excel or CSV. And when you click zip, it is going to always give you the full zip file for that table, regardless of any customizations you've made on screen. And finally, how can you print the table or download a PDF? We have not officially built this functionality through a print or PDF button on the table display. So what you would want to do is actually download the Excel format of the table, and we have optimized the Excel output for printing. So what this means is when you download the Excel output and click into the Data tab, when you print from here, you are going to get the full table. All of the columns and row labels will carry over across pages so you can make sense of the table printout in its entirety. If you use the print button that we have on data.census.gov, it is simply going to print the first page of the table. So unless you have a really small table, know that the Excel output is an option for you to print. Right, moving on to the microdata access tool on data.census.gov. Everything we've been talking about so far is related to the main data.census.gov where you're accessing pre-made tables. We do have a feature called the microdata access tool on data.census.gov/MDAT that allows you to create custom tables. So typically speaking, you would create a custom table if the pre-made table doesn't contain enough detail in terms of the topic that you're wanting to access, but you do want to make use of the pre-made tables when at all possible to get the most accurate recent information and for the most comprehensive set of geographies. Now, if you are choosing to use a custom table, the lowest level of geography for those tables in the context of American Community Survey data would be public use microdata areas, or PUMAs. We talked about these briefly when we were mentioning language data, and a lot of people want to know what PUMAs are. Well, they are geographic areas that include 100,000 people or more. They completely cover the country. And what most people want to know is, how do these geographies relate to geographies that I already know? Typically, what you'll see is that they relate very well to county boundaries. So the way you'll see this play out is typically one or two ways, depending on the population size of the county. So if the county has over 100,000 people, as the example on the screenshot on the left shows for Loudoun County, Virginia, you'll typically be able to add one or more PUMAs together to equal the boundary of the county. So this shows 3 PUMAs on the left that equal the boundary of Loudoun County, Virginia. And for counties with smaller populations, you'll typically see that one PUMA will span multiple counties. So on the right-hand side, I'm showing an example of a single PUMA that covers completely the counties of Shenandoah, Warren, and Page, Virginia. So this means that for counties and most metro areas and micro areas across the country that have populations of 100,000 or more, you'll typically be able to add one or more PUMAs together to get data at the county or metro area level. And then if you're working with data sets on the Microdata Access tool that are not American Community Survey, typically the lowest level of geography provided would be the state level. Now, because you can add PUMAs or even other geographies together to get something that may be more meaningful to you, we get users wanting to know if they can group or aggregate these geographies together. Within the past year, we've added the ability to do that directly on the Microdata Access tool. You can access this functionality through the Geographies tab and clicking the Group tab at the top. And any individual geographies that you've already selected will be able to be grouped into a geography of your choosing. So this just shows an example where I have grouped those 3 PUMAs together. I've created a label called Loudoun County. And what this group does is it means that I will see a row or a column in my table with the data already added up together for all 3 of these PUMAs in a single number for Loudoun County. For step-by-step instructions on how to create a custom group, I encourage you to visit the link at the bottom. Many users creating custom tables also want to know if they can get national and state level data in the same table view. So currently we don't have this functionality available. The process to get the data would be to create one table on the left-hand side where you don't select any geography whatsoever. Most data sets on the Microdata Access tool will default to the national level. And then once you've created that table and got access to the national level data, you would again create the same table or go ahead and add a geography selection at this point in time at the subnational level in order to see the data for those geographic areas separately from the nation data. So on the right-hand side, I've shown where I've selected the filter for Maryland, and then that will generate a row or column in the table for Maryland data. In keeping with different limitations of the Microdata Access tool, I also wanted to mention, can I get percentages, medians, or margins of error in the Microdata Access tool? The short answer to this question is no. If you're working with percentages or hoping to create percentages, what you can do is use the Microdata Access tool to get the total counts that you would need to calculate the percentages of interest. And then you could export the data and then calculate percentages outside of the site in, say, Excel or some other format. But ultimately, you would be able to get the numerators and denominators you need directly from MDAT. If you're trying to calculate medians or margins of error, those are not possible to do on the Microdata Access tool. So what you would need to do in these cases would be use your own statistical software. You would need to download the raw microdata files from the FTP site or elsewhere, and then calculate medians or margins of error through your own software. And when you're creating a custom table in the Microdata Access tool, you'll need to make sure it's weighted to reflect the overall population. We sometimes get questions from users wanting to know which weight to apply. When all of your variables you've selected use the same suggested weight, that would be the weight that we would recommend, and it's also the weight that we default to. So you don't need to do anything special in that situation. But if any one of your variables has a different suggested weight from another variable that you've selected, you would want to consult technical documentation to learn more about those weights and to further research which one would make the most sense for your analysis. The system is going to default typically to the suggested weight for the first variable you selected, but again, you will need to review what's the use case for your analysis and potentially manually change that selection. If you'd like to find the suggested weight for your data set, there's a number of different ways to do it, but kind of similar to the mapping example we showed for data.census.gov, if you want to use the site directly to tell you the suggested weight for a data set, you can select just one variable and then immediately go to the table view, and you'll see the suggested weight would be automatically applied. In this instance, we're looking at health insurance variable from the American Community Survey, and we can see that its suggested weight for that variable is the PUMS person weight. In that menu on the left-hand side, there's also an option for unweighted. And when you switch to unweighted counts, it tells you the number of records that are used to create an estimate. So to take this a step back, typically you're going to create a table. A default weight will be applied. In this example, I'm looking at military service in Loudoun County. So I can see that based on the American Community Survey, Public Use Microdata Sample 2023 estimates, there were roughly 1,131 active duty military members living in Loudoun County, Virginia. And if I change on the left-hand side from person weight to unweighted, it tells me that 11 records or 11 edited anonymized survey responses were used to create this estimate. So the unweighted count just gives you a data quality measure that may be useful when you're trying to interpret the data from MDAT, especially because MDAT doesn't allow you to calculate and show margins of error for these data. And then also, based on this information, you may decide you want to use a larger geography or perhaps switch from ACS 1-year estimates to ACS 5-year estimates. All right, moving outside of data.census.gov to the Application Programming Interface, or API. For folks that are using the API, we get lots of questions wanting to know how to get the results in a CSV file. Within the last few months, we released a new parameter. You'll put ampersand output format equals CSV, and do know that it's case sensitive. That is a capital F in format. And when you do it, it's going to automatically download the results of this API data request in a CSV file. You'll notice on the right-hand side, it looks very similar to a table download that you would get from a zip file in data.census.gov. Taking this a step further, we also got lots of questions from users wanting to know, how can I get the variable names included in any API data request? We added a parameter called ampersand descriptive equals true. When you add that in, you'll get a description of the variables. So rather than having to remember that, hey, variable B19013_001E was data for the estimate of median household income, adding this ampersand descriptive equals true will put the information I've highlighted on the screen into the output. Another question, can I get API calls or variables directly from data.census.gov? Partially. So we recently added in the past couple of years an API button at the top of data.census.gov tables. That's going to give you a link that gives you the entire table that you're seeing on screen for the specific geographies you selected. So if your goal is to get an API request for an entire table, yes, you can click the API button, copy the data link, and there is your API data request. If you're looking for an API data request to pull specific variables, we don't have functionality that would give you the API call in its entirety that you can copy and paste. But we do want to point out here that if you download the zip file from data.census.gov, the first two rows of that file do give you the variable labels and names. So you could use this information to help you identify, how to go about making that request in the API. Another common question, how do I get data for multiple geographies in the API? You can separate the FIPS codes with a comma, as you see in this first example. Here we're showing data at the state level, and we've specified FIPS 01 and 02, which give us data for both Alabama and Alaska. If you're using the UCGID parameter, that is where you can list fully qualified GeoIDs, and you separate those with a comma as well. What's unique about using UCGID is you can get data for multiple levels of geography in the same request. So here I'm getting data for Indiana and Marion County. So both state and county level data in one API request. You can learn more about this parameter in the API user guide. We'll be sharing that link shortly. And finally, how can I get data over time from the API? In most cases, it's going to result in you having to make separate API queries. So you'll notice here that I'm showing an API request. It has 2023 in the data request. So if I wanted to get the data for a different year, I would have to do another call where I change the year from 2023 to something else. When you make those changes, especially when you're working with the large data sets from the American Community Survey and decennial census, you'll need to make sure that the variable has not changed over time as well. So variables remain relatively stable over time, but there certainly can be changes from year to year, and you'll want to check for those changes and verify before you just start assuming that the data is exactly the same from one year to the next. There are a few data sets in the API that are time series, and in those data sets, you'll be able to get data across different points over time in the same view by using ampersand time equals. So this is an example of a data request from the quarterly workforce indicators data, and it's showing the number of new hires across different quarters. I mentioned earlier the API user guide. We have resources pages for data.census.gov, the Microdata access tool, and the API. I listed them here as the first three links. You can also navigate to this information by clicking the Help button on the landing page of data.census.gov. Oh, and then right next to the Help button, you'll also see a feedback link on the landing page. That is going to allow you to send an email to census.data@census.gov. We take your comments on how we can make the site work better. We do continuously improve the site over time, and then also we take data questions through there as well. And if you're part of a national organization and want a training on data.census.gov, you can request one of those by visiting the link at the bottom. This screenshot shows you, again, that help and feedback link that I was referencing. In the help section, we also wanted to point out here that we have opportunities for you to get hands-on practice. So we have workshops that we offer. They're anywhere from 2 to 3 hours in length. You'll be able to view one of our instructors demonstrate how to access data. You'll have time for an independent exercise, and then you'll work through that on your own and come back together as a group to make sure you got the right answer. They are offered monthly and are free to join online. We offer for data.census.gov a basic, advanced mapping and geography essentials. We offer one on the Microdata access tool. There's a workshop on the Census API. And then we have 2 new workshops, one on finding American Community Survey data and one on finding economic data. So we hope to see you in one of our workshops. And if the current schedule does not meet your needs, do remember we offer them monthly and check back regularly. You can also stay up to date to these opportunities by signing up for our email updates. So when you visit the QR code in the upper right or the link on the left, you'll be able to check the box for data.census.gov updates. This will subscribe you to our monthly newsletter where you'll learn about the latest data releases, system enhancements, and educational opportunities to help you make the most of the site. And right now, an additional opportunity for those interested would be to participate in usability testing. So this is a more formal and structured way for us to get feedback from you if you're willing to be a participant in one of our usability sessions. They last about 60 minutes. And we've done these regularly over time. Our next usability is going to be right around the corner in August. So we're taking volunteers for people that are, willing to join one of these sessions and participate in a structured way. What you'll typically work through is a set of instructions and exercises for you to find a data point. As you're working through the site, you'll be asked to describe your thought process aloud as you're navigating through the site, and this will give us information to help us figure out what's intuitive on the site, what's working well, where people get hung up, those types of things. If you'd like to register, visit ced.cedsci.usability.list@census.gov, send us an email, and we'll be in contact with you to try to schedule something. So thank you for your consideration on that. Another resource I wanted to share is your local data dissemination specialists. They are hosting the webinar today, and you can reach out to them. There is a data dissemination specialist assigned to each state, and you can get their help by emailing census.askdata@census.gov or 1-844-ASK-DATA. They help with data requests and provide training as well. And they're not limited to just data.census.gov, the Microdata access tool, and the API. They specialize in all things and all topics and tools related to the Census Bureau. And with that, I will turn things back over to Deb. Thank you all so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Tyson. Those were all very insightful questions and answers. So thank you so much for this presentation. I hope that everyone joining us today has learned something. But before we wrap for today, I want to let you know that we have set up a quick evaluation survey, and that is going to pop up when you exit the WebEx screen. So when you see that survey window, just please take a moment to share your thoughts with us. We would love to hear what worked well, if there is something that we could be doing better, and especially if any other topics should be covered in a future webinar. Now, if you have any questions remaining after we conclude our session today, or if you would like to email us your question instead, feel free to reach out to any of the email inboxes listed here. If you are a member of the media, please contact the Public Information Office at pio@census.gov. And for general data.census.gov questions from the public or for training requests, please reach out to the Center for Enterprise Dissemination. Now, I just want to take a moment to thank you all so much for spending the afternoon with us and to learn more about data.census.gov, the Microdata Access Tool, and the Census API. We really appreciate your interest and also your engagement. And if you have any questions remaining, please feel free to reach out to us. Once again, thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again in a future webinar. Have a good afternoon.
This concludes today's webinar. Thank you for your participation. You may disconnect at this time.